I'd like to say, first of all, this morning that I appreciate Bryce filling in for me. I was supposed to be the song leader this morning, and I have got a lot of congestion and sniffles, stuff like that, and I knew there was no way I could hit all the notes. And so I'm hoping that I will be able to get through the lesson tonight, but I've got my water, got a pocket full of cough drops, got some tissue, if I get sniffles or whatever. So if I do get to coughing or anything, it'll pass in just a few moments. But appreciate the opportunity to preach to you this evening. You know, in the past, I have been criticized before for using too much personal stuff in some of my lessons. I'm going to talk about some personal things today. That's my experience. That's where I learned, not from your experiences. You have your experiences, I have mine. But I think you're going to see that it's going to fit into the lesson very well. As many of you know, I went to Alabama a couple of weeks ago to visit my sister and my brother. They're both dealing with severe dementia. My brother he's 4 years older than me, has no clue who I am. My sister, at times she did ask, my brother-in-law, whose name is Terrell, by the way, said, who are all those people upstairs? And I'm thinking, it's just me. I mean, all of us. But anyway, he said, it's just David. And she said, so where's Terrell? And she said, I am Terrell. And she said, no, you're not Terrell. Terrell's out driving around somewhere. That's what he does all the time. And Terrell said, so if I'm not Terrell, who am I? And she said, I'm just you. You're just you. But I don't know where Terrell is. And so when your siblings, she's only 2 years older than me, when your siblings start having those kind of issues, it's sad. My mother died of Alzheimer's. I had an aunt that had Alzheimer's. I just buried a first cousin that had Alzheimer's, and her brother has Alzheimer's, my brother and sister. And that's all on my mother's side, the Lowe family. So I tell people I'm going to stick with the Mitchell genes. I'm ignoring the Lowe genes. The Mitchells live into their 90s, so I'm just going to hang in here with my Mitchell genes. But when I was there, we took for a ride around town where I had grown up in Southeast Lake and Roebuck in Birmingham, Alabama. And I thought, well, maybe my sister might jog some memories for her. And so we drove around and, went down to places. I asked my brother-in-law, I said, is the old Selective Service building there, where we signed up for Selective Service back in the 60s? And I said, I don't know, but we'll see. And we drove by. It was there. And we both said at the same time, there it is, door number 2, right up there. That's where we went. And so we were bringing back a lot of memories. We drove up by the old high school where I went, Banks High School. And Banks High School was a proud school when I was there. It was built in 1957, and I was there in the 60s, and so it was a proud school. It's nothing but just a foundation and a bunch of bricks and stuff like that now. It was a unique school. It stretched out a quarter of a mile long in different sections. And so if you were way down here in section G and you need to come to section A, you had 10 minutes to cover that quarter mile. So you didn't talk to anybody, which was hard for me to do. So I was usually late if I had a class like that. And so my sister asked me, she said, did you go to Banks? And she knew good well to us. We were in the band together there. And then we drove up in one of the old neighborhoods. And it was where I had moved there when I was 8 years old, when we left Sheffield, Alabama, and moved to Birmingham. And the neighborhood, it was a circle we lived on, it's a ghetto now. Houses with roofs falling in, The houses that people were living in, they're not taken care of, tall grass. It was just really sad to see, and so we left there and we drove over to another area of town where I had moved when I was about 9 years old. We just stayed in that house a couple of years, and we pulled up, nice neighborhood still, and there were a couple of people in the side yard. So I just pulled up, parked the truck, hopped out, and went over there and said, hey. They came out and saw me walking toward them, and I said, I moved into this house when it was brand new, when I was 10 years old, in 1960. And the lady was, wow, and so I started describing the house to her. And I said, you got the living room right there, and then right behind that is the dining room, and then off to the right you got this long kitchen and sort of den area. And then when you go down that hallway, I said, there was my bedroom, bathroom, my parents' bedroom, and their bathroom and that, and then my sister's bedroom. And they said, it hadn't changed. And the lady said, why don't you come on in? And I was just shocked. I mean, I was beside myself. And I got the shower locks on my truck. So my sister got out. She was sitting up front. My brother-in-law was in the back seat. And so I went over there and talked to him. I was really excited. She was going to let us walk through the house. And then right before we went in, she said, oh, by the way, there's somebody in your back seat that's beating on the window trying to get out. So I went over and got my brother-in-law, got him out. And we ended up staying there for an hour and a half. And the memories flooded back from the time I was there, from the time I was 10 until the time I left in 1970 to go into the Coast Guard. And so just so many things came back. They showed us all around the house, on the side of the house. It was a long house, and there was a tree about like that. And the lady said, you remember that tree on the side over on that side of the house? And I said, yeah, I do. My sister fell one day when we were both running out there, and I just yelled back at her, fake, fake, fake. She, but she really did hurt herself, but I didn't believe her. Well, that tree now was about like that. She said we had to cut it down because we couldn't squeeze around between the house and the tree. And so many things just flashed back. And so what I'm going to be talking about is Ecclesiastes. And I think that fits with these kind of memories. I've taught classes on Ecclesiastes. I've preached on Ecclesiastes. But I've never preached on it when I'm this close to that old person, or I am that old person in chapter 12. And I've never preached it when I had, for sure, more years behind me than I have ahead of me. And I turned 75 this year. And one of these days, and I'm talking to these young ladies on this row right here, these two semi-looking, good-looking guys right here, that one of these days, 50 years down the road, if the Lord gives you that much, y'all are going to run into each other. And you're going to have, like these two right here, maybe a conversation. They hadn't seen each other in 30 years. And Titus says, wow, Zach, you got a whole lot more forehead to wash now than you used to have. And oh, by the way, how's your arthritis doing? What are you taking for blood pressure? You got high blood pressure? Yeah, I got high blood pressure too. And the girls would be sitting there, yeah, you remember, oh, what was his name? When we were at Garden Ridge together, that guy that had been an elder forever and ever, I think he was appointed back when Paul was an apostle, that old guy. What was his name? And y'all have these conversations if the Lord allows you to live long enough. And so that's why I want to talk about what does Ecclesiastes mean to us. And as you get older, and Solomon addresses, it's written by Solomon. Solomon lived to be about 80. He was probably in his old age at the time he wrote this, to have covered all the things that he had done. And so when we think about that, and I can remember in 1965, 1960, when we moved in that house. Something like 2025, that was science fiction stuff. That wasn't reality. The same's going to be for y'all. For 20 whatever, you know. And so I'll be long gone. I maybe have 20 years at the most left. I understand that. And that's why, to me, Ecclesiastes means so much more to me now than it did when I was younger. But I want you young people to understand that it's addressed to you, too. And it even says, remember the Creator in the days of your youth. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Ecclesiastes is, much of the book is a review of Solomon's lifelong search for valid meaning in life on earth. And when I look back now, all the things that were important to me, the family reunions, when I was a little kid, there were the old people and the really old people. And then all of a sudden I became the old people, and all of a sudden I'm the really old people. I'm along with the patriarchs. That's getting old when you go to a family reunion. That's why I don't like to go to them anymore. And so, you know, it happens if the Lord gives you that length of time to live. And you need to be living that for the Lord. And so all the things that were important in the past, in my jobs, I can remember these papers I would get that said, this is urgent, you need to reply immediately. I have no idea what was urgent. Probably whoever wrote that letter has no idea today what was urgent. And I do understand that some of y'all, and especially in the health things, when you have something urgent, it's urgent right then. It really is. But for a lot of us in our jobs, what's urgent is not as urgent as we may think it is at that point in time. And so Ecclesiastes can be looked at as being four discourses, and that's what I want to look at it. And the first discourse is in chapter 1 to 2 and verse 16. And it's really looking at the vanity of human efforts and achievements. If you look in chapter 1, very first beginning, and I'm going to begin with verse 3. And Solomon writes, what profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises and the sun goes down. It hastens to the place where it arose. And so we see then that he's talking about, okay, you know, what profit is there? The sun comes up, the sun goes down. I figured it up. That's happened to me, best I can figure out, about 27,200 times, okay? That's a lot of sunrise and sunsets. I slept through most of the sunrises, especially after I retired. But it still happened, regardless if I saw it or not. The sun went up and the sun came down. And verse 11 is one thing that helps me put things into perspective at chapter 1. And Solomon writes, there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who come after. I want to mention a few names to you and see how many of you know who I'm talking about. Gary Peterson, of course, yeah, we all know who I'm talking about here. But maybe Jose Lopez, Steve Smith, some of you know him, Paul Gilbert, Russ Gage. Those were our very first deacons here. And now there's a population of the congregation here who these men were very important in the establishment of this church, that they're lost. They're lost to history. And it will get more and more so as more people move in and people leave and so forth. And that's what he's talking about. There's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who come after. And so our time is right now. Our time is now that we are living. And that's when we are contemporary with one another. It means we live together. But there's none of us that lived in the time of George Washington. But yet we read about him. And we have to read to sort of figure out. How many of us know our own family tree? Maybe we can name names going back, but do you know what that person was like? How that great-great-great-grandfather of yours, do you know what kind of personality he had? Was he a good guy? Was he a nice guy? Was he just a wretch? We don't know a lot of times. We know names, but they are lost to history. We, in this generation, if the Lord lets time continue on, will one day be lost to time. And nobody's going to remember who we are that sits in this auditorium today, unless it's a family member or whatever. Is the church even going to be here then? I'd like to read in chapter 2, and I'm beginning with verse 1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth. Therefore, enjoy pleasure. But surely this was vanity. I said, laughter, madness, and mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, that I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. I made my works great. I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants. I had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and other provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and of musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity, grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. Man, that's pretty depressing, isn't it? Only when we look at that on the surface. And I can feel pretty confident that I don't think any of us are ever going to attain the wealth and all the knowledge and all that stuff that Solomon had. If they do, and I'm still alive, invite me over, and buy me an F-250 or whatever. But I don't see anybody here attaining that kind of wealth, that kind of knowledge and everything. So what becomes of our wealth? If you look over in chapter 2 and verse 18, then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I showed myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. I've got with me right here a harmonica. This was my dad's harmonica. I was not allowed to touch it when I was a kid. None of us were. And when he passed away, guess who it belongs to now? To do whatever I want to do. I can toss it down on the floor, I can step on it, I can do whatever. I'm going to respect his wishes and take care of it. But you see who I'm going to leave it to right here, possibly. A couple of these characters right here on these two rows. What are they going to do with it? Sell it on eBay? It might do. I mean, the thing is old. It's older than me. It's an old harmonica. But now it's mine. But 20 years from now, it may belong to one of them, or to my son, or to my daughter. And who knows what they're going to do. And so what was Solomon's outlook on this? Again, in verse 11 and 19, all was vanity. And again, it sounds depressing, but only on the surface, because the second discourse starts in chapter 3, verses 1 through 5:20. And it is the appreciation of divine laws governing life. And we read this passage, Josh read it a while back, I think, not too long ago, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. In 1965, there was a group called the Byrds, Byrds. I asked Heidi the other day, I said, "Do you know who the Byrds were?" She just looked at me. "You ever heard of the song, Turn, Turn, Turn?" She just looked at me. Well, in 1965, it was a #1 hit, and it was taken from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And it was written by Pete Seeger in 1962. And most of us at that time, a 15-year-old, I would have been at that time, knew what this was and knew what Ecclesiastes was because of that song. But it says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain, a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace." God has set in motion what life is going to be like. And this lets us know that everything has its time and has its place. And in chapter 3, in verse 10, "I have seen the God-given tasks which the sons of men are to be occupied. And he has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God." And so what he's saying here is the life that we've been giving is the gift of God. That's where the value is, and we need to understand that. Jesus affirmed in Matthew chapter 6, 19:21, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but in heaven." He again says the same thing. Where is the real value in life? And it is in heaven. It is in God. And understand that that is the gift of him. And then we also see in chapter 3 and in verse 19, something that's common to all, to man and beast. And that is, "For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which goes upward, and the spirit of the animal, which goes down to earth?" And so what we see in this particular passage then is there is a difference in man and in animals, because when our spirit leaves us, which happens at death, then it goes upward. And it says the spirit of the animal goes down to earth. But we all return to dust that were made. So understand that our body is we are a spirit. We are a soul that is encapsulated in a body that does not live forever. And it gets old. It gets decrepit. We have diseases. We have problems with it and everything. That's one of the things that God had put into motion. The Hebrew writer, speaking of Jesus offering himself once for man's salvation, speaks of this fact of death. Hebrews 9:27 and 28, it's appointed to all men to die after this, the judgment. And again, what he's talking about here is Jesus offering himself once for man's salvation, but he uses that in that way. And so we understand that our contentment comes from enjoying the gifts of God. Okay, and if you look over in chapter 5, and I want to read verses 18 and 19. And it said, "Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him. For it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it and to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God." So we need to understand that we need to enjoy the fruits of this life. But that's not where our focus needs to be. Our focus needs to be on God and on heaven. And I appreciate the lesson that Robert did this morning and the songs on heaven. And again, as I get older and older, then I have a whole different view on death and on heaven than I have in the past. We should enjoy these gifts with thanksgiving. 1 Timothy 4:4 says, "Everything is good if received with thanksgiving." So all that we have, we give thanksgiving. The third discourse, and again, he goes back to a little bit more the negative. This begins in chapter 6, 1 through 8:17. And that discourse just says, "No satisfaction in earthly goods and treasures." Okay, Solomon speaks of the inadequacy of the worldly attainments in his third discourse. Wealth, large families, long life, just no real satisfaction in any of this. And in chapter 7 and 1 through 4, Solomon gives a very somber value to death. And it's one that I think it's important for us to remember. He says, beginning in verse 1, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart." And so you think, okay, so I'd rather go somewhere and mourn instead of go have fun somewhere. And that's not the way that we want to work. But we understand what the end is. And so Solomon's saying, understand that. And this passage should make us all stop and think about where we are and what we're doing. The passage that I had Titus read tonight is in James. It is one that everybody was familiar with. And it's in James chapter 4. Most everybody knows that passage fairly well. It says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away." A vapor. I've got written in my book, my Bible, "Remember Anthony, January 19th, 1991. That was the morning that I got a call that my 33-year-old cousin had died in a plane crash. And then I've got another one that said, "Remember Rex, June 26, 2011. That was the day that I got a call from my brother-in-law, Terrell, right here in this building as we were starting services, that my cousin Rex, who was 52 years old, who was in my wedding, who was more like my best friend than a cousin, had just dropped dead." Just gone. While he was talking, he just fell down dead. 52 years old. And so, is it a vapor? Yes. Look at Psalm 39. Psalm 39 is another very important passage for us, I think, for us to look at. And I like the way that the psalmist puts it in this particular passage. He says in verse 5, toward the end of it, I'll just start at verse 5. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you. Certainly, every man at his best state is but vapor. At his best state, he is but vapor. On down in verse 11, at the end of it, he said, surely every man is vapor. What is vapor? Vapor is something that just appears for just a moment. Like if you're boiling water and the vapor comes up from the tea kettle or whatever it is you're using, and then it's gone. And that's what he's saying our life is like. And that's what we need to understand, that our time here has purpose. But when we look at the scheme of things, again, I went back and mentioned George Washington. Well, let's go back even further. On the Ides of March in AD 50, I think it was 52, Julius Caesar was killed. I didn't know him. You know, I wasn't around. But there were a lot of people that were at that time. And it changed Rome. But all those people are long gone. And then there's all these other people that have come and gone during this time. And if we were to stretch a line out covering all of time, our little life is just this little spot. I've heard it say it's the dash between the day of your birth and the day of your death. That little dash is your life. And that's truly what it is. It's just a little dash. And so I encourage you to think about that. And again, Solomon talks even more about it. And in chapter 9 and verse 4 through 6, chapter 9, verses 4 through 6, he says, but for him who is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. Keep that in mind, okay? A living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier. The memory of all the normal people during all this time, we have no idea. These Christians that we read about in the first century, we have no idea what these people were like. What did they do? What were the things that were important to them? You know, the thing that we know is for the most of them, though, that we read about in the scriptures, what was important was God and that life. And now, the fourth discourse starts with chapter 9, and like I say, I've already looked a little bit into that one, that God will deal with injustices of this world. And that's what he was talking about there. It comes out to the righteous and the sinner. He says in chapter 2, verse 2 of chapter 9, all things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good, to the clean, to the unclean, to him who sacrifices, and to him who does not sacrifices. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he who takes an oath is he who fears an oath. This is an evil that in all that is done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. And so we put that in God's hands. We put that judgment in God's hands. And then the key to this, and this is the one for I want you young people to hear, is in chapter 12. Y'all need to burn this verse into your memory. The young people that are here, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. And he goes on to say, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim, when the doors that are shut in the streets and the sound of the grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird and all the daughters of music are brought low. Also they are afraid of height and the terrors of the way, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper is a burden and desires fail, for man goes to his eternal home and the mourners go about in the streets. Now what he's describing there is old age, okay? And when he says, when the grinders cease because they're few, it's not as bad for us today because we can go get teeth. But for back then, their teeth disappeared after time. And they really looked bad, they tasted bad and everything. That's what he's talking about. The grinders, they cease because they're few. Those that look through the windows grow dim, and that's looking out, your eyesight. Your eyesight gets worse. And again, that's something y'all are going to talk about 50 years from now. Well, yeah, how long have you been wearing glasses? Yeah. Well, can you see at night while you drive okay? Or do you need to, whatever. These are the things you talk about that y'all will talk about 50, 60 years from now. Okay? Your aches and pains that happen in the morning and everything. When the doors are shut in the streets and the sound of the grinding is slow. When one rises up at the sound of the bird, it doesn't take much sometimes to wake up an older person. Okay? And all the daughters of music are brought low. And he just goes on and he decides this. And then the last part he says is, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed. And remember why you can still talk. Okay, you can say words like silver without trying to get sliver coming out, whatever. But anyway, remember your Creator before all that happens, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well, when the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. This last part in verse 6, talking about the silver cord being loosed, or the golden bowl being broken, the pitcher shattered. There's some different views on really what that means. I believe that talks about the finality of death. It's over. And so you need to remember the Lord before that time. And don't think just because you're young that it doesn't happen. Zach had a cousin several years ago, 15 years old, that was killed on a camping trip riding a scooter. And an RV came around the corner and hit him. 15 years old. Had his whole life ahead of him. But also, my cousin, 33, that's young. That might not be young to you folks right now, but that's young. And so we need to focus on God now. And so Solomon's conclusion is in chapter 12, verses 9 through 14. He says, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words of what was written and what was written was upright, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails, given by one shepherd. And I think what he's talking about here is you have the words here that you need to know what you need to do to guarantee your salvation. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. I tried to pull that one on my parents. That didn't go too good with them. But the idea is, there's just so much you do here in this life. But what is important is living for God. And so that's what he says in verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. So what's important? That passage right there. That is our reason for being. That is the answer that so many people search for when they say, well, what's the meaning of life? Solomon tells you right there in Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13 and 14. Another one that needs to be burned into your mind, okay, of what is important. What is your life? We talked about that in James. A vapor. It's temporary. And I'm closer to the end of mine than many of y'all. I've been through a lot of things. I've been through 14 different presidents, one of them twice. That's a lot of presidents. Truman was president when I was born. When you look back at the people on the Byrds that sang that song, there's only two of them that's still alive. And one of them, David Crosby, you might have known because he went on to be part of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. But he's dead now, too. And the two that are living, one of them's 80 and the other one's 82. Time marches on. And these, when I was a teenager, man, these were the songs we bought on what now, Heidi just got a record player. And she's saying, like, how cool is this? And I said, yeah, it's really cool. Okay. So I showed her how to use the speed. I said, you put this thing on, put it on 78 and see what it sounds like. And she said, what's 78? And I said, that's the speed. And I said, they used to make these big records that were 78 RPM. And then you've got the 45s. And then you got the 33 and a third. And what you're playing is a 33 and a third. And they've been around for ages, okay? They used to be glass. You drop them and they're gone, and most of those were 78. Nothing new under the sun, is it? And that's what he says. Nothing new under the sun. So again, think about these things. And the reason I mentioned my trip down memory lane is because all that was real to me. It was my life. And all I have now is memories of that. All I have of my brother and my sister are memories. Although they're still alive, all I have is memories. Enjoy those memories while you have them. God blesses us with memories. But what's truly important, again, is Ecclesiastes 12:13. Nothing else you do in this lifetime will be as important, that one thing. I encourage you to strive always to put first things first. Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And then all the things that you need will be given to you. But that's the key, is seeking God. And don't wait. Don't put it off. We need to do it today. If there's anybody here that's subject to the gospel invitation, we're going to sing a song, and we'll be glad to help you in any way that we can. I hope that, again, I know so many of y'all have the same kind of memories. You have the memories of the high school that you went to, those of you that are older. There's not a whole lot of y'all that's older than me anymore, by the way. There are a few, and I appreciate y'all. We all have our memories. And so I'm not just saying that to share with you, what really got me excited. You have the same memories. And the older you get, the more important those memories are. And if you can drive around and see your old high school, if it's still there, if you can still see, the old house you lived in, all these kind of things, and those memories flash back, good and well. But what's important, again, is Ecclesiastes 12:13. If you're subject to the invitation, I encourage you to come as we stand and sing.